then if we look at, okay, what's the basic documentation? Now, when I say financial drivers, I want to be clear about something. I'm only talking about things that are most important to the patient. So when I say financial drivers, I'm not talking about scam. That is not what I'm talking about here when we say the word financial drivers. What we're saying is the things that are most valuable to the patient. That's what financial drivers are, okay? So when we talk about financial drivers, and then they come up with the injury software in the 90s, early 90s. You know, the first one that came out was the Colossus. Now there's several types of injury award softwares. Matter of fact, I don't know of any insurance company that still just uses insurance adjusters themselves to give injury awards. In other words, only the cognition without software. I don't know of any. Almost every, it's like 90% plus insurance company, their insurance is using some form of an injury award software because it saved them a lot of money. So when they started going to Colossus and these injuries, they started making millions and millions of dollars. Now, it only has to do with the routine. So the Colossus databases and those injury award softwares are only for the normal, the bell curve of injuries. They do not apply to the periphery. In other words, if you had a burn, that's a unique injury. That's not going to apply to Colossus. So we're talking about the routine bell curve injuries, okay? That's when these injuries, so they have, because there's a large enough database, they have a database to make assumptions with the normal or what's considered the bell curve of an injury. So having said that, they're using these injury award softwares, and so all we talk about is the financial drivers, and this really just comes from experience. There is no book that says here's how Colossus works and all that. It's all, you know, it's all behind closed. It's behind the curtain. It's behind the Wizard of Oz curtain. But through experience, people will know what carries more value and what doesn't, all that. So what we talk about is when we look at the financial drivers of a case, we're talking about there's 5 major financial drivers of the case. Number 1 is the injury. That's always number 1. If you don't have the injury, no other financial drivers open in that software case. So you have to have the injury to start with. Number 2, after the injury, is the impairment. That's the second. And by the way, this is the order of the injury award software. Number 3 is the loss of enjoyment of lifetime activities, where in other words, things that you can't do anymore. You lost them. Activities of daily living that are important that you lost. Well, the case that I gave you, what was one of her activities of daily living that was pretty darn important? Picking up her 6-year-old child. That was pretty important for a mother. Well, she did have full range of motion, right? She did. I explained she did. But when she went into overpressure, she went to the end of that motion, and what took her past active range of motion was the weight of her child. That took her into overpressure motion, and bam, she couldn't do it. That's when it was painful. And I explained exactly why, the physiology of why that worked that way. And I not only was able to explain it based on the science, not my opinion, based on the science, I could connect it to the mechanism of injury, the subjective findings, the hybrid subjective and objective findings, and the totally objective findings. And when I was able to do that to an 8th grade educated jury, they all said, that just makes sense. So the next one is duties under duress. In other words, some of the activities of daily living that you can do, but they're still painful. And then the last one is the prognosis or the need for future care. Now, that's your case. That's your case. Now, as a chiropractor, we're routinely going to document all this stuff in some form, generally. And I'll tell you the good and bad news as far as doctors and chiropractors relative to this documentation. Because overwhelmingly, it does not get done. Overwhelmingly. So, Here's where the bad news starts. Is if this is the number one injury, the soft tissue injury, okay, we already know the disc injury, that's easy. That's easy to justify MRI. That's easy to put together. It's no problem. Nerve injury, that's easy. Concussion, a mild concussion's not. And a fracture's easy. Here's the problem. The vast majority of the injuries are soft tissue injuries. So they will not have a disc injury, a fracture, or a nerve injury. That's 2/3 of the cases right there. So if you don't have the documentation for that, automatically that patient's value decreases significantly.